Hey guys, welcome to Physicality and welcome to Halloween. Today for Physicality, I'm going to do something that I don't do too often, and it's going to be the top 30 horror movies in my collection. Now you can see there's some spots cleared out, so you might be able to predict a couple of movies that are coming into this, but there's going to be some that you will not see coming. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. This is number 30, Species. This movie terrified me as a kid. This was one of those movies that I watched in the VHS days. It was recorded off a TV, and yeah, it's one of those movies that really affected me as a kid. It's one of those movies I was watching around the same time as A Nightmare on Elm Street, for example. And to be honest, Species is one of those iconic 90s movies for me. It's one of those ones that I think of like, if I think 90s horror, Species will be like, oh yeah, Species. That makes sense. It's got Forrest Whitaker in it. It's also got Alfred Medina, who plays Dr. Octopus. Yeah, pretty decent movie. Not for everyone. I don't know how many people have seen Species, but definitely a respectable number 30. 29 I'm going to be a bit controversial with. I'm ranking this as 29, but also the rankings can change, because Resident Evil has been higher on the list in previous years. It's also been lower on the list. It's also never made the list some years. But for me, Resident Evil is one that I keep going back to. Now, yes, I know it's not accurate to the games. I know the games exist. But for me, growing up with Mila Djokovic as Alice, that was a pretty cool concept with Resident Evil, and they were still releasing these like through my teenage years and stuff like that. And while people can say what they will about Resident Evil, I think that last scene in the first Resident Evil movie, the first Resident Evil movie, it screams like dystopian zombie. It's probably the best scene in all of the zombie movies to begin with, like, where they do that big zoom out and Alice is just on the street. She has the shotgun and the world's ended. So that's 29. 28 I'm going to rank Saw. And why would I put Saw as 28? Well, it's not something that I instantly think of horror. I think of like gore, I think of stuff like that. The first one is probably the best one out of all of them, but also with Saw, I feel like it became one of those franchises that just relied too heavily on gore. The first one was a bit more artful, but it's also one of those ones that I don't rush to instantly and say, that's the horror movie, I gotta watch that one, that's the one. So that's why I'm ranking this as, what is it, 28? 28 is Saw for a reason. It's one of those ones that I grew up watching, and it was in cinemas around the same time as when I was in high school, so it's pretty cool. That being said, it's not something that I'm instantly thinking of, unless I'm doing the callbacks to Tobin Bell with the cap, saying, to de-age someone, all you got to do is just put the cap on backwards, because, why spend costly money on de-aging people when you could just put a hat on Tobin Bell? Why would you take any extra cost to the budget? It's pretty effective, but I think that was Saw 7 that did that. Either way, let's continue on. That was number 28. 27 is The Sixth Sense. Why would I rank this as number 27? Well, obviously it's one of those M. Night Shyamalan movies that are so iconic for the time. I think this is one of the ones that I'm always referencing. I'm referencing, yeah, when M. Night Shyamalan was good, he was really good. And then you have stuff like Old, where he's not too good anymore, in my view, with Old. But when I think of M. Night Shyamalan, definitely think of The Sixth Sense. The next one I want to talk about is I Know What You Did Last Summer. This was so iconic to the time. I mean, you have Sarah Michelle Gellar, you have Jennifer Love Hewitt in there, you have, what's his name in there? What's his name? I forget his name. Freddie Prinze Jr. I should have known. He used to write Raw as well. But, this movie is iconic for the 90s as well, and early 2000s, I think it might have been even been early 2000s. Not 97, I'm right. 90s. But this is so iconic. You have to think Buffy at the time was massive, and to have Sarah Michelle Gellar in a movie was massive during this time. And obviously, Jennifer Love Hewitt was at peak at that point. She went on and did Ghost Whisperer and stuff after that. But as you hear a big plane going over, this is something that, it's definitely horror. It's definitely one that I hold high regard. So what are we? We're 5 in so far. Parasite is up next. When I first watched Parasite, I'm one of the people that fell for the trailers. I was like, oh, this doesn't seem like a horror movie. And then you watch this and it's like, oh, okay. Parasite's one of those movies that kind of resonates. And it's not even an English-speaking movie, which makes it even more impactful that it's on this list. when I think of Parasite, it's one of those ones that really grabbed me early on and was like, okay, I know what I'm watching and I like this. And also, there are movies that are not on this list that are more drama, so like murder, mysteries of a murder or something like that. So I know there's other films, but they're not on this list. So there are stuff that's not on this list that's going to be jarring to some of you. Keep in mind, they are still on a list in my head. I still would probably do them in the top 50, but for the sake of this, Parasite was in there. Next, I want to rank Oldboy in here because Oldboy is one of those ones that constantly gets referenced. It's one of those ones that really shock you, and when you watch it for the first time, you might be a bit put off by the idea of watching this, but then as you watch it, you start realizing how brilliant it is. And, you know, Oldboy is one of those ones that, I mean, I can always go back to that one. This is iconic to me. And the fact that it's another non-English speaking movie, when you go outside of Hollywood, you really have movies like this, like, absolutely dominating and showing how good horror can be outside of America and outside of Western speaking countries. So Oldboy's in there for a reason. Now you might say that's a bit more action, that's a bit more drama, but I'm ranking it in horror because that I would consider that a horror. The Thing. How could I do a list of horror movies without The Thing in here? The Thing is one of those classic horror movies that I didn't grow up on, but I've got a new respect for it because I only watched it for the first time like 6 years ago or something. And when I watched it, I was like, this is horror. This is like horror 101, you know? This is like, how do you do horror so well? This followed so many core examples, you know, isolation, and then what would happen if something got loose, and then you've got to test people, and what happens then? Like, what is the actual protocol here? What would you do in this situation, you know? And that's the whole thing, kill it with fire, where that comes from. The next up is a drama, and I'm very aware this is a drama, but I'm going to rank it as a horror movie because to me it's one of the scariest movies I've ever watched, and it's Requiem for a Dream. This movie addresses a very real concept of drug use, and sorry, I have to say that term, that's what this movie's about, and it talks about some long-term effects of that. To me, this is one of the scariest movies of all time, like, because it's so real. It's literally drawing from what you hear so many stories from people who live that experience. So that's why I'm ranking this as, what are we? We're number 21 or something? 22 something? Either way. Requiem for a Dream is in here. If you're keeping count, you can keep count. But Requiem for a Dream is in here for a reason. Because it's so good. Because it's so iconic. Because, to me, it's so real. And so that's why it's in the horror movies. The next one's going to get some of you, like, riled up. American Psycho. What a movie. Let's see, Paul Allen's top 30. But yeah, what can we say about this? Is it Christian Bale? It's Christian Bale, Batman, yeah? Yeah, Christian Bale. Christian Bale is amazing in this movie. He holds the screen, but also you believe what he's going through. You believe certain aspects. You believe that he is believing what's happening. And, you know, this movie has been debated so much online, whether it's real, whether it's not real, whether he's imagining it, what's going on. Is he actually somewhere else? Is he dead? Because there are little signs that he might be dead in this movie, in the restaurant. So there's a lot of stuff in this movie that is debated. But also, for me, American Psycho is one of those movies that will always be constantly referenced. It's one of those movies that I'm like, that's psychological thriller, but also in a lot of ways, that's how you do a good horror movie as well. Like, this is why I rank it in the horror movies in this month, because this, to me, screams horror. And you'll see a lot of that recurring in this video. So there's a lot of movies in here that might be different genres. But to me, it's all about how do they get the vibe down for a horror movie? Do they align with a horror movie more than an action, or more with a drama or thriller? What are we? We're in the next 10, so this is probably number 20 for those keeping count. So number 20, 28 Days Later, Killian. What a movie. What can we say about this that hasn't been said? The low res that they shot it on, they shot it all digital. This was one of the first fully digital shot movies, I believe. And the fact that this is so iconic and inspired sequels that even revolutionized, I mean, Running Zombies in 28 Weeks Later. I have to watch the new one, but this one is definitely up there in terms of what I would rank as a great zombie movie. I mean, it's up there. It's not as high as Dawn of the Dead, because that's coming up. A lot of you have noticed probably by now Dawn of the Dead usually sits there, and that's higher up in the rankings. It's not high as Dawn of the Dead, but it's definitely respectable. And I definitely rank this very highly because of Killian. He just does amazing work in this one. And yes, it's a very early one where he sees the plane going over at the end and stuff like that. But I really like this movie. I think I rank this very highly. Next up is Friday the 13th, the original. Now I know people will be like, oh, but the Jason movies, you got to have one with Jason in it. The original was the best in my opinion, because it didn't have the slasher necessarily down fully. And yes, we all know Mrs. Voorhees, we all know. But I feel like at a certain point with Jason and the genre of Friday the 13th that was in horror, I feel like they relied too heavily on the kills. And this was one that, yes, it still had a lot of kills in it, but it wasn't as extreme, and it does horror in a very different light to the rest of Friday the 13th. And as I said, like, I probably haven't seen a lot of Friday the 13th movies. I've seen bits and pieces of everything, but to me, I rank this one so highly because I quite enjoy the work the first one put in. You can't have the rest without this one laying the foundation, I will say. The next one is not necessarily a horror movie, but I would say it kind of shares a lot of the core fundamentals of a horror movie. Mad Max. Now, Mad Max, people say action, that's not even horror. It's so dystopian. It actually has a lot of concepts in here that share from what I would consider horror. Like, there's a lot of like dystopian sort of stuff and a lot of like what's going to happen next, and oh, that's happened, and then this happened, so this occurs. And also the vibe of the movie overall, it screamed horror to me. When I first watched Mad Max, I thought I was watching a horror movie. And that says a lot. And yes, you can say where you rank it these days. I put it in with its own section with the Australian section. But for me, Mad Max is up there in terms of horror. And as I said, this is not necessarily 100% horror, this list. This is mixed in with different sort of things, but it all follows the core fundamentals of what I would view as a horror. Next up, it's in a box set, but I'm counting the first Conjuring movie, the first one. Without the first Conjuring movie, we wouldn't have had The Nun, we wouldn't have had Annabelle, we wouldn't have had all of this. And yes, there are things I could have put in this space. I thought very heavily about putting Child's Play in there. I thought very heavily about putting Chucky in this list. And for reference, Chucky is not in this list. Because to me, Child's Play became a bit goofy after a while. With this one, though, it kind of aligns a bit more with the spirits and kind of like, oh, dark energy and stuff like that. That's why it's so scary, and it's also drawing from Warren's case files, so, you know. I think this one's a much more scary movie and a much more scary series than Child's Play, and that's why I haven't ranked Child's Play on this list. I do consider it a high-up horror movie. I just have not put it in the listings because it was going to get this spot, and I felt like The Conjuring edged it out. Now, you might say I could have put it above, I could have got rid of Mad Max or whatever, but that's my list, so I'm going to do what I want. Whatever, I do what I want. Battle Royale's next. What can we say about this movie? This has inspired so much. I mean, if you like The Hunger Games, that's where this draws from. If you like so many of these Battle Royale concepts, like if you like Fortnite, if you play Fortnite, this is where it comes from. Battle Royale is one of those movies that when you watch it for the first time, it will be jarring. And it will be it'll confront you. It'll be very confronting to you. But keep watching it through. If you watch it till the end, and also I think there's a director's cut as well. There's a special edition's cut, director's cut, yeah, and there's also the theatrical. I've watched both. I think the director's cut offers a bit more, but if you're watching it for the first time, I'm just going to say watch the theatrical version, because you always start with theatrical and then you grow out. It's like Lord of the Rings. Watch the theatrical first, then go on to the director's cut if you want to view more. The next one is debatable whether it's a horror movie. But I think it is. I think it just stays directly in horror. Although the rest of the series will be very much action. The first Jurassic Park movie. When you first see the T-Rex coming through that fence, and especially when you're watching on the VHS days, and even the Velociraptors coming out of the jungle and stuff like that, that screams classic horror. You don't know where the next jump scare is going to be. You don't know what's going to happen next. this to me, even the arm going on the shoulder where, what's her name? Laura Dern. Where Laura Dern feels the arm on her shoulder and it appears the arm's not attached to anything because the velociraptors, you know? This movie screams classic horror. And this movie, to me, holds up as one of the best horror movies ever made. Now, given it's a drama, it's a thriller, it's a action, whatever you say genre-wise, yes, I agree. It should be with the rest of the Jurassic World and all that. But for me, this screams horror. And Spielberg drew a lot from horror to make this movie. So remember that. On the back of that, this is one of the classic sci-fi movies. A lot of you are going to probably get very angry with me for ranking it this low. But Alien. Sigourney Weaver. And also the original Alien movie where you didn't know what was going to happen next and then the xenomorph pops out of the chest and stuff like that. This holds up and inspired an entire series, you know. You could say it's sci-fi, but in a lot of ways it's sci-fi horror. And also the sequel was sci-fi action, so I didn't want to rank Aliens in here because it's more action than anything. This screams horror. This is horror. And when you watch it for the first time, it can be jarring. But Aliens is one of those classics that you can constantly go back to year after year after year after year. So that's why that's in my top 30. I don't know how to approach this one. The Amityville Horror. Now, I know what most of you will say. This is Definitive Horror 101. This is drawing from real life. Obviously, the Amityville Horror is based on a true story. But in a lot of ways, it's probably one of the best horror movies based on a real life story ever made. I mean, yes, it takes a bit of, what's it called? Takes a bit of liberties. But in terms of the story, this really, holds up. And when I was thinking about ranking this, it was either this or Poltergeist. So you'll see Poltergeist is not on this list. Where is Poltergeist here? I did not rank Poltergeist on this list. Poltergeist is not in the top 30 because I tried to do challenges head to head, and Poltergeist was edged out by Amityville because of the real life tying, you know, it's based on a real life story. So that's why I've put Amityville in here. And for those wondering, you can say what you will in the comments, but that's why the comments are there. The next is a thriller. The next one is a thriller. But in terms of horror, I think it got so much right. 7. I mean, say what you will, but Matt Damon and Morgan Freeman, and especially Kevin Spacey, this screams horror. And this one, absolutely, I would rank as a horror movie. Because when you first watch it, it's one of those movies that you kind of get really into. And then as it continues playing on, it's like, well, oh no, that's happening. And then you start seeing more and more psychological aspects. 7 is in there for a reason. If you haven't seen 7, you need to watch 7. And then you can tell me whether it's a horror movie or not. Some of you are going to be angry for me for ranking this as number, what is it? We're at number 11? This is number 11. The Shining. Now, Jack Nicholson is iconic. We know about how Kubrick directed this movie. We know everything about the movie. We've all seen it. Most of us have seen it. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. But for me, this screams horror, and it's also one of those movies that really grabs you from the time you start watching it to the end of the movie. You're like, what did I just watch? And then you go back and rewatch it, and you watch it again, and again, and again. So, if you haven't seen this movie, you need to see it. And there's so many pop culture references in this movie that you don't even know. Like, you know, here's Johnny, you know, Johnny Carson. You know, a lot of people don't know who Johnny Carson is. You know, the host of The Tonight Show back then. So there's a lot of stuff in here that you really start appreciating. And the portrayal from Jack Nicholson, iconic. But yeah, that's number 11. We're in the top 10 territory. A lot of you know from the shelf that there is one missing right there, and that's the next one. Dawn of the Dead. How could we go past George A. Romero's classic? This inspired so many zombie genres. Now, you could say Night of the Living Dead's more important to zombie genre overall. You could even say Frankenstein. Like, I haven't got any of the Universal monsters in here, but like, Dawn of the Dead defined a genre. And in a lot of ways, it's the reason why we have The Walking Dead now. It's the reason why we have The Last of Us. It's the reason why we have So much that it inspired 28 Days Later. You know, it's the reason why zombies are the way they are, because George A. Romero revolutionized the genre. And this, to me, it's something that I only watched for the first time maybe a decade ago. I didn't grow up with it. And there's a reason why I consider it so high, because I grew up with the Snyder Cut, and you realize how many things Snyder took from this version of it to make into his. So a lot of places are inspired by this movie, and it would be inappropriate of me not to have this in the top 30, you know? So this is definitely top 10 for a reason. So that's going back on the shelf right now. Number 9, how could we go past the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? With the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's one of those movies that really grips you for the first time you watch it. Because it's not relying so heavily on gore. It's very limited in gore. It more relies on not jump scares, but suspense, I would say. And that's where a good horror movie is made. With a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you kind of have to think the era this was made in was very high on censorship. It was very high on, you can't show that. And when they show certain aspects in here, it's like, ooh, I can feel that one. Like there's parts in here where there's a hanger and a coat hanger, like a meat hanger. I'll let you discover that for yourself. But, you know, without this, we wouldn't have got so much in the horror genre. This, in a lot of ways, I feel inspired a lot of slashers, inspired a lot of Wes Craven, inspired a lot of other directors to follow suit. So we got to rank that one so highly. That's number 9. As you hear the plane going over, let's talk about number 8, The Blair Witch Project. Yes, people will say, this isn't a horror movie, that's not even scary. My mind plays out a scenario with this movie, and I don't think The Blair Witch was actually doing any of it. I think The Blair Witch is a story that the two guys used to lure Heather into the forest, and, you know, you can put what you need to there, but I consider this to be a disturbing found footage movie. Rather than Blair Witch was hiding out in the shadows and doing all this, coming in overnight. You can say that way, yeah, that's also scary, but this has a dark aspect to me because when you fill it in with your mind, it's like, I feel that movie went that way. But you might disagree. That's why the comments are there. That's why that's number, what? Number 8. So hold on, what have we got left? We got the next one up. The original Ring. This is the Japanese Ring. So when you watch this one, it's got a lot of aspects in there that if you don't like reading subtitles, you might not understand. But that's why they have the pause function. Pause it, have a read, keep watching if you must. But when you watch this in full, I would recommend start watching it. Don't pause it, just watch through. Follow the action. You can follow body language in this movie very well. And yes, if you're reading subtitles, I read subtitles pretty fast, so I understood what was going on. But for me, this is up there for a reason. With the original Ring movie, this showed the world that, you know, stuff like The Grudge, stuff like The Eye, you know, Eastern Eye cinema, you know, I think that was a genre of films in Australia. It might have been worldwide, but I know Madman called them Eastern Eye for a while. But when you start seeing classic horror, like in terms of Japanese, this is up there. This holds in high regard for me because this is better than the American versions. This shows you that you don't need jump scares around every corner. You don't need, you can put stuff there and insinuate certain things, but you know, the whole thing of like the found tape and 7 days and stuff, that is better in this version than I would say in the American version. Now, I'll give credit to Naomi Watts. She did great with the American versions and stuff like that, but I just prefer that version. The next one is going to be controversial, but I'm putting Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lambs is one of those movies that always scream horror to me. It's one of those movies that I rank very highly. It's one of those movies that I watch at least once a year. It's one of those movies that, because Anthony Hopkins is so good in it, and also, you know, Buffalo Bill as well in there and stuff like that, it's one of those movies that is so iconic to the time period it was made and has resonated with audiences since that you literally can't do a horror list without it. Now, given you might say it's psychological thriller, it is. It's so many different genres. But to me, I rank this as horror because, you know, Anthony Hopkins was so good. And Jodie Foster playing off, like, as the as the underlying, like, the young cop trying to solve a murder, you know, that's what resonates, you know, that's why it's so good, and you follow her journey. But then you also have Anthony Hopkins, who's the locked up serial killer who can give advice on certain things. So Silence of the Lamb is in there for a reason. Are we down to top 5? We are down to top 5. Wow. This list went fast. And yeah. So the next one is going to be, it's up there. It's in my top 5 for this year, but keep in mind my rankings fluctuate year after year. So it might have been lower down the rankings last year. It's higher in the rankings this year. And I'm wearing the shirt. They Live. This one, for me, I only watched this for the first time like 6 years ago or something. And for me, it's one of those movies that I rank highly because, you know, Piper is so good in it. And also it's dealing with a lot of modern society. It's a take on modern society, like, you know, consumerism. And, you know, I would say it's probably more sci-fi than anything. But in terms of They Live, like, you start seeing, like, where they're going with it. What is the topic they're tackling? Consumerism is definitely a big one. Also, you know, control of governments and stuff like that, the control aspects. This one ranks as a horror because I would say it resonates so well, and also it deals with a lot of topics that are very scary to deal with. So we're going to rank that one as number 5. As you hear the plane going over, I don't know which one to do as number 4 and number 3. I think I'm going to go with this as number 4. Scream. How iconic is Scream? Wes Craven doing a classic horror movie. Like, in terms of Scream, this was made at an era where, you know, he was coming off stuff like A New Nightmare, and Wes Craven had to redefine a genre. Slasher genre had become kind of a joke by that point. It had become kind of like run its course. It had become kind of like, oh, just another slasher, another slasher, who cares? This one does so well in, like, terms of what it gets right. Now, obviously, this had to redefine a whole genre of slashers, and yes, Wes Craven kind of did take the joke of, like, yeah, slashers are kind of a comedy in a lot of ways, but if done in the right way, you can have something that's very scary, but also one of those iconic horror movies. So that's why I had ranked this as number 4. It's definitely iconic. And also, it's one of those movies I revisit every year for Halloween. Top 3. Number 3. The Exorcist. How can we do any horror movie list without The Exorcist? You know, The Exorcist is one of those movies that has scared generations. It has stayed with generations. It has completely defined a genre. The Exorcist, for me, is one of those movies that when you first watch it, you don't actually know what you're getting, and then you watch it and it's like, whoa. Like, I remember watching this for the first time when I was like a kid. Not too young, but like I was definitely like 9 or 10 and I rented it from the video shop. This was one of those movies that really stay with you, and it's like, Linda Blair is so good at that, but also the priest. I forget what the priest's name is. If you know, drop it in the comments. I forget what the priest's name is, but it's such a good movie that you really can't go past. This is definitive horror. This defined the genre. So many other movies that came after it were inspired by The Exorcist. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of what The Conjuring does is drawn from The Exorcist. So that's why that's number 3. This next one's going to be controversial because a lot of people will rank this as number 1. But I'm going to rank it as number 2 because the channel's named after it. Psycho. Now, the channel directly isn't named after Psycho. It's named after Alfred Hitchcock Presents, you know? So it's named after that. But Psycho, in a lot of ways, is a definitive horror movie. Yes, it is thriller. It's psychological thriller. It's suspense. You know, the master of suspense, Hitchcock. That was his nickname. But when you watch Psycho for the first time, I watched it for the first time in high school, and you really start understanding how Hitchcock was a master of his craft. Hitchcock, in a lot of ways, got so much right with horror that it's hard to explain and give it full credit. I mean, I could talk for a half hour about Psycho and still not give it the credit. Now, you saw other horror movies on there, like The Birds. Yes, he has had other movies that will probably be more definitive horror. Like The Birds is more definitively horror. But I'd say Psycho is the one that I resonate with. It's the one that I'm like, yeah, that is horror. That is how you do horror. Norman Bates, like, you know, the suspense, the dark aspects, the black and white add to it. And that's why I'm ranking Psycho as number 2. And then there was 1. Now, a lot of you who know me, a lot of you who follow this channel, a lot of you who have been long-time subscribers, know where I'm going with this. You know, there's one movie I haven't mentioned. It's one I watched at a very young age. It's one that I have referenced so many times over the end of this channel. It's one that I give credit to for inspiring my whole taste in horror. And I will get the figurine. I will get the figurine. I am going to get it. Stick with me, guys. Do you know what it is yet? Look at that. There's a reason why this is number 1, guys. Because when I was growing up, this was the definitive horror movie. Freddy Krueger was as scary as anything. Especially when you're 4 years old watching this movie on VHS, you know. I was a product of that era, you know, and you start seeing stuff like a lot of my horror tastes revolve around Freddy Krueger. Wes Craven, who knows if I would have found Scream if I didn't watch A Nightmare on Elm Street. Who knows if my horror taste wouldn't have been so carefully refined during the video store days if I didn't experience this at a young age. You know, a lot of people get into horror at a later age. This one for me, I got into very young. And I rank this so highly because, for me, Freddy Krueger has always been like one of the most definitive horror stars, horror icons. I would rank him highly, more highly than even, you know, there's people who I haven't got on this list, like, I haven't got Michael Myers on the list. I haven't got, I mean, I had Mrs. Voorhees, but I didn't have Jason on the list, you know? I don't even have Ash on the list, you know? I haven't put Ash on the list, you know? There's a lot of people on this list who are more definitive horror icons. And you might say some of my movies could have been replaced by some of those. But for me, it's my list and I'll do what I want. Whatever, I do what I want. But yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street. This for me is definitive horror. This for me is how you do horror. This for me is how you do slasher. This for me has inspired my entire horror taste. That's why it's number 1. There's reasons why I have a freaking statue of Freddy Krueger. I mean, was it ever going to be anything else other than number 1? So yeah, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, not any of the sequels of that. And I will make a video about the sequels, about like the box set that just came out, because I know there's going to be people wondering like, oh, you're going to upgrade? To me, my thought on that is like, oh, I don't really need to make a video. I can just say, you know what? My thought on that is like, do I really need to upgrade when HD would be good enough for most of these? Like, I don't really care about number 1, and the rest are more casual viewing, you know. I watch this one once a year, or maybe twice, 3 times a year. This one I watch, the rest of these I maybe watch once in a blue moon. Who knows? But yeah, for me, A Nightmare on Elm Street is the definitive horror movie. It's not a horror movie, it's the horror movie. So that's the reason it's number 1. Do you agree with this list? Have I done something, have I ignored something so wrong that I should have put on here? Should I put Child's Play on there? I mean, I could have put Chucky in there. But as I said, I've explained my thought process through this whole video, hopefully, so you get some sense of the way I thought about this list. But I'm sure the comments are still going to be flooded by, you got this entirely wrong. What was that movie doing in there? That's not even Jurassic Park. What's that doing in there? That's why the comments are down there, guys. Make your thoughts known. You don't have to agree with me. But that's my top 30 for Halloween 2025. Peace, and I will catch you in the next one. Go follow everything. Go follow my other channels. Go follow everything. You know where they are. I don't need to advertise it. Peace.